before listening to this sermon, if you could please read the selection of verses below this video, that would be of great help. During lockdown, people stocked up on flour and bought 4 weeks of bananas, only to realise that bananas quickly brown. For this reason, banana bread became the most searched recipe on the internet, as nearly every UK kitchen was filled with fresh bread's wonderful smell. Perhaps you are one of those people who enjoyed baking banana bread. Even if you weren't, we all love the smell and taste of fresh baking. However, from the perspective of the ingredients, the process of making banana bread is extremely painful. Step 1. Ignore a yellow banana every day for 14 weeks. Make it feel rejected and worthless until it goes brown. Step 2. Select an uncracked egg, one that's been protected since birth from trauma. Then, smash it to pieces. Step 3. Separate the yolk from the white. If the yolk pleads, "Stop me and egg white have never ever been separated," ignore the yolk's pleas for mercy and separate them anyway. Step 4. Place your bread dough in a warm place and let it double in size. Then, bring it back down to size by beating it up with your hands. Make sure the dough feels like it's done 12 rounds with Mike Tyson. Step 5. Let the ingredients suffer intense heat in the oven for a long time. Remove the loaf just before it burns. It's easy to empathise with the ingredients of banana bread, for whenever we go through difficulty, we experience the same things. We might feel that God has rejected us. We might mourn the loss of the comfort and ease we previously enjoyed. We might feel like God is standing back as life inflicts on us blow after blow after blow. We might ask God that our suffering would end, only for our day or year to go from bad to worse. You know, if you or I were writing the recipe for our life, none of these things would be included. But, like with each step of banana bread, God is working to produce something good. For God works in our difficulties to help us become more Christ-like and grow our faith in Him. God's blows have a purpose. One of these purposes is to expose the idols of our hearts. And after this exposure, God grows in us the fruit of faith, godly character, and love. So firstly, God's purposeful blows. Now, southern Israel, otherwise known as Judah, had plans to avoid trouble and difficulty at all costs. They'd even made ungodly alliances with other nations. This was to protect themselves from the disasters that God's messenger, Isaiah, had said would occur. However, Isaiah warns Israel that their hopes were misplaced. Verse 14 of chapter 28. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord, you scoffers who rule this people in Jerusalem. You boast, we have entered into a covenant with death. With the realm of the dead we have made an agreement. When an overwhelming scourge sweeps by, it cannot touch us, for we have made a lie our refuge, and falsehood our hiding place. Now, in many ways, Israel's situation was unique. For them, trouble was a specific act of God's judgment. Israel had received a specific word from God's prophet Isaiah to tell them that this was the case. Because of this, Israel's desire to escape trouble was more about wanting to avoid the consequences of their actions. However, most of the time Christians experience difficulty, it is not because God is judging them or punishing them. The experiences of Job and Jesus are two key examples that demonstrate this point. But though, in many ways your troubles may be very different from Israel's, the thing that unites us with them is this. We all seek to avoid trouble at all costs. None of us plan suffering into our lives or volunteer ourselves to have a bad day. But despite our wishes, bad days and chronic suffering still occur. This causes God's people much confusion and distress. For this reason, God uses a farming analogy to remind us that there is purpose within the pain. At the end of chapter 28, we read of a farmer breaking up and working the soil in order to plant seeds. We also read of a farmer beating seeds in order to bring out rich spices. And we read of a farmer grinding grain in order to make bread. Within the pain, the farmer is working towards a good purpose. Out of the bad, the farmer is at work for good. In much the same way, God uses the troubles and difficulties in our lives for good purposes. This good might include the growth of our character, or the deepening of our faith, or a renewed appreciation of God's goodness in a world where every other thing in life lets us down. Even in the most painful of blows, God is at work for his people's good. Now, it's important we also understand that the God who first created the world, perfect, in no way delights in pain or suffering. God doesn't delight in suffering and pain. We see this in verse 28, where the farmer holds back from threshing the grain too much in case it is destroyed. The farmer does not delight in the threshing process. His delight is the seed and in the crop produced. In much the same way, God does not take pleasure in pain or suffering, but he does delight in you. And for this reason, God may use your troubles to expose the parts of your character that need work on, as well as God might use these troubles to increase your faith and your love for him. God's purposeful blows, and now the worthless exposed. One way Israel had turned from God was by turning to Egypt. For when they saw the looming threat of the nation of Assyria, Israel turned to the nation of Egypt rather than to God for help. Israel turned to Egypt for security. They wanted Egypt to provide them with a sense that everything would be okay. They turned to Egypt possibly for prosperity. They wanted to enjoy the same affluence that Egypt's gods had attained for them. Israel turned to Egypt for identity. They wanted to share Egypt's status as a significant nation. Rather than turning to God, Israel turned to Egypt. And the similarity with our lives is this. We too seek security, prosperity, and identity in things other than God. We might seek security in things. For example, we might ask the internet to predict the future before it happens. We like the security of always being in control. When our sources of security are taken away from us, or when they let us down, we panic. And that's when our misplaced dependence on them is exposed. We seek prosperity in things other than God. We have our idea of what we need to be happy, and we run after it. We dread the day when this, that, or the other is taken away. We wouldn't admit to being idolaters, but when we experience extreme frustration at what we don't have, or when we experience significant anger at something being taken away. When these things happen, the idols of our hearts are exposed. We create an identity around things other than God. We view ourselves as a somebody if we succeed, or if we win the esteem of others. But then we call ourselves a nobody when we fail, or when other people achieve more. Both success and failure reveal how we look to things other than God for a sense of value and worth. The disasters and difficulties of our life expose our idols and show us that our faith in them is misplaced. A point God made to Israel before their troubles occurred. Reading from chapter 30 verse 3 to 8. Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. Then later, everything will be put to shame because of a people useless to them, who brings neither help nor advantage, but only shame and disgrace. Then again, Israel's envoys carry their riches on donkeys' backs, their treasures on the humps of camels, to that unprofitable nation, to Egypt, whose help is utterly useless. And again, go now, write it on a tablet for them, inscribe it on a scroll, that for the days to come it may be an everlasting witness. God exposed the worthlessness of Israel's idol, Egypt. God exposed the worthlessness of Israel's idol, Egypt, when trouble and disaster struck them. For when Assyria conquered Egypt, God showed Israel that their faith in Egypt was misplaced. Egypt did not and could not provide Israel with the security and prosperity for which they desired. In much the same way, all earthly sources of security, prosperity, and identity will let us down eventually. That's why God uses life to expose the worthlessness of our idols and points us in the direction of something better. Chapter 28, verse 16. So this is what the sovereign Lord says. See, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone, for a sure foundation. The one who relies on it will never be stricken with panic. When Babylon broke through Israel's walls, Israel would be stricken with panic. Their walls of defense and Egypt's military strength had let them down. At that moment, God pointed Israel to a cornerstone, a figurative way of describing something that would give them a solid foundation from which their entire lives could be built. God was saying that he would provide Israel with an even greater source of security, an even greater source of prosperity. God was offering Israel the opportunity to build their lives on something more secure and something more stable. And the New Testament speaks of God offering the same to you and to me. Reading from Acts chapter 4 verse 10. Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom was crucified, but whom God raised from the dead. Jesus is the stone the builders rejected, which has become the cornerstone. Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. God's Son, Jesus Christ, was and still is the cornerstone Isaiah was pointing to. For Jesus offers us a security, prosperity, and identity on which you can base your life. Jesus offers us eternal security, a hope beyond the grave that can never be taken away from us. In the meantime, Jesus left us with the security that surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Jesus, the one who possesses all authority and is full of grace, is with you in everything that you face. Jesus offers us security, and Jesus offers us a new identity, an identity as God's dearly loved sons and daughters. Because of this, you can know that you are loved and valued no matter what, even if you don't succeed in life, and even when you fail. Jesus offers us security, identity, and Jesus offers us true riches, true prosperity. A prosperity Jesus summarized in the word blessed. Reading from Mark's Gospel in chapter 5, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Jesus, the cornerstone, offers you a security, hope, and identity on which you can build your life. Is your life built on Him? Or do you find yourself looking to other things for security, meaning, and identity? When the things of the world let you down, do you panic, or do you look to Jesus and the promises that He has given us? So this is what the Sovereign Lord says: "See, I lay a stone in Zion, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone, for a sure foundation. The one who relies on it will never be stricken with panic." Jesus, the cornerstone, offers you a security, hope, and identity on which you can build your life. But despite both Isaiah's and Jesus' teaching, sometimes we need life to teach us these truths firsthand. A point God made to Israel in the latter half of chapter 30. Reading from verse 20 of chapter 30. "Though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teacher will not hide himself any more, but your eyes shall see your teacher." Isaiah describes God as the teacher within Israel's adversity. For sometimes only through adversity can certain lessons be learned. For example, no proud person thinks they are proud, but as soon as their pride is hurt, their pride is exposed. Very few Christians would describe idolatry in their top 3 sins, but when our emotions fluctuate dramatically, depending on if we do or don't have what we want, it might indicate that a good thing has turned into an idol. Perhaps we are basing our happiness around something too much. These are just 2 examples of how God uses adversity to expose things about us, things that we can't see, things that we don't want to see, things that we could see no other way. So, some questions it might be worth asking yourself. Number 1, am I not only willing to study the Bible? Am I also willing to let life study me? For the pressures of life will expose things about you that you could learn no other way. Second question, are you willing to examine why certain situations cause you to react in panic, anger, frustration, and sadness? These are normal reactions to life's troubles, but occasionally our reactions can take an extreme form. This can perhaps be an indicator that we might be looking for security or an identity or happiness in the wrong things. Third question, are you willing to let adversity expose your less desirable qualities? For example, impatience, pride, self-sufficiency. Adversity exposes such things so that we can work on them with God's help. God uses adversity to expose things about us, and in doing so, God causes fruit to grow. Thirdly, the fruit that grows. Chapter 28 spoke of the work that goes into preparing to sow seeds, breaking up the soil and pressing seeds hard into the soil. Chapter 30 speaks of the fruits that come from such work. For in verses 23 to 25 we read of a rich and plentiful harvest, farm animals feasting on the food produced. This was God's way of saying that his painful blows towards Israel had a purpose. For out of the pain of Israel's Babylonian exile, much fruit was produced. The New Testament describes God as using adversity for a similar purpose. Hebrews 12, verse 9. We have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Parental discipline comes in one of two forms. One form of discipline is focused on the past. For example, because you did that yesterday, I'm going to do this to you today. This type of discipline usually takes the form of punishment. But the other form of discipline is focused on the future. For example, I'm going to do this for you today, so that tomorrow you will be a better person. This second, future-focused form of discipline is what God is referring to in Hebrews chapter 12. God uses the adversities of today to help us to become better people tomorrow. God disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, i.e. today, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. God's discipline has a future focus. God uses adversity to expose our idols so that we'll abandon them, like with Israel, who in the day of their adversity would respond in the following way. Chapter 30, verse 22. Then you will defile your carved idols, overlaid with silver, and your gold-plated metal images. You will scatter them as unclean things. You will say to them, be gone. God uses adversity to expose our idols, and show us their worthlessness. And also, God uses that adversity to diagnose our fallen condition, so that he can help us move towards becoming more Christ-like. Like with Israel, whose faith and love for God were dull before their adversity, but bright afterwards. Chapter 30, verse 26. Moreover, the light of the moon will be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun will be sevenfold as the light of 7 days. Adversity helps us become more Christ-like and reflect God's character more. And thirdly, God uses adversity to heal us. For each time life breaks us, we are pointed back in God's direction. Chapter 30, verse 20. Though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teacher will not hide himself any more, but your eyes will see your teacher. Verse 26. In the day when the Lord binds up the brokenness of his people, and heals the wounds inflicted by his blow. Adversity points us in the direction of God's Son Jesus, someone who provides us with an even greater source of security, a more lasting and meaningful hope, and a more lasting and meaningful identity as sons and daughters of God.